On an ordinary Tuesday at 2:14 in the afternoon, my housekeeper called my office, and the first thing she said, before hello, before my name, in a voice I had never heard her use in 6 years, was, "Whatever you do, don't come home. Marta does not call me. Marta texts, grocery lists, a photo of a stain she conquered, once a picture of my cat asleep in the salad bowl." In 6 years, the woman had never once called, and now she was on my phone at 2:14 on a Tuesday whispering, and behind her voice I could hear men, moving men, the squeal of packing tape, the flat cardboard thud of a life being boxed, in my house, on a day when I was supposed to be 200 miles away at a design conference. I said, "Marta, what is happening?" And my housekeeper, 58 years old, a woman who irons pillowcases nobody asked her to iron, took a breath like she was stepping off a roof and said, "Mrs. Tessa, he thinks you fly out tonight. There is a truck. There are men. And there is a folder in his study that I was never supposed to see, and I have been sick about it for 2 weeks. And I cannot be quiet anymore, even if it costs me this job. Don't come home yet. Come to the corner of Linden first. I will meet you by the mailboxes, and I will show you what I found, because if you walk in that door without seeing it, he will talk, and you will believe him because you always believe him." And that last part, friends, that is the sentence that put my keys in my hand. Not the truck, not the folder, the fact that my housekeeper had watched my marriage closely enough for years to know exactly how it worked. He talks. I believe him. 6 years of dusting a house teaches a woman where everything is, friends, including the things nobody ever told her where they were. I drove home in 11 minutes. It is supposed to take 19. And what happened in the next hour ended my marriage, 9 years of it in the driveway between a moving truck and a mailbox. And I need to make you 3 promises before I take you back to the beginning, because tonight deserves an itinerary. First, the envelope. What Marta pressed into my hands at that mailbox was not just his folder, it was hers. A little spiral notebook from the dollar store with a church calendar tucked in the front, and inside it, in careful Sunday handwriting, 14 months of dates, times, names, and license plates. And when I tell you what my housekeeper had been recording and why she started, you are going to want a Marta of your own, and you cannot have her. She is family now. That is the ending. You still need the middle. Second, the race. There was a Friday in this story, 11 days after the truck, where $210,000 of our money was scheduled to leave the state by wire at close of business, and my attorney and I got the freeze filed at 4:55 in the afternoon, 5 minutes before the courthouse clerk went home, and you are going to live those 11 days with me, minute by minute, because they were the difference between starting over and starting from nothing. And third, the deposition. Months later, in a conference room with bad coffee, my husband's attorney leaned back in his chair and said, "That's a touching story, but can you prove any of it?" And my attorney, a woman named Gwen, who bills like a surgeon and smiles like one too, said, "I hoped you'd ask that." And she opened a banker's box, and what came out of that box, item by item in evidence sleeves, made my husband's lawyer ask for a recess in under 11 minutes. 11 minutes, friends. Same as my drive. There is a poetry to collapse if you keep your receipts. If you have ever been the last person to know something everyone else could see from the street, do one thing for me before we start. Tap that like button, subscribe if you want more stories where the quiet ones keep notebooks, and tell me in the comments the name of the person who finally told you the truth. First names only. They deserve the credit. Mine is named Marta. My name is Tessa. I am 35 years old. I stage houses for a living, which means I make other people's lives look perfect for money. And it took a moving truck in my own driveway to teach me I had been staging mine for free. Stay with me. Every box in that truck gets opened tonight. 9 years ago, I married a man named Brent, and I want to describe him honestly, the way he actually was, because the internet loves a cartoon villain, and cartoon villains teach you nothing. Brent was charming the way weather is warm, generally, pleasantly, and with no particular effort aimed at you. Commercial insurance, top salesman 3 years running, a man who remembered every client's kid's name and forgot our anniversary twice, which I forgave, because he apologized beautifully. That was his actual talent, friends. Not sales. Apology. The man could apologize in a way that left you feeling like you had won something. And it took me 9 years and one notebook to understand that a man who apologizes that well has usually had practice you don't know about. I brought two things into that marriage. The first was my business. I started staging houses at 24 with a borrowed pickup and an eye I got from my mother, who could walk into any room and tell you in 4 seconds what was wrong with it, a gift, friends, that skips the furniture and eventually starts working on people, though it worked on furniture first and husbands last, which is the tragedy of this entire story. By the time I married Brent, I had 2 employees and a warehouse unit full of rented elegance. By this spring, I had 9 employees, a real warehouse, and the contract for every builder's model home on the north side, and I will tell you plainly what nobody at our dinner parties ever guessed, because Brent did the talking at dinner parties. I out-earned my husband every single year of our marriage except the first. The second thing I brought was my grandmother's money. She died the year we bought the house, and she left me $180,000, and every dollar of it, every single dollar, friends, went into that house, the down payment, the kitchen, the addition, and I can prove that sentence to the penny, and the reason I can prove it matters more than the money, so hear this part like it's underlined. I run my life like I run my business. Every invoice scanned, every receipt photographed the day it exists, every transfer memo filled in, not because I suspected anyone, friends, but because I was raised by a bookkeeper's daughter who told me the first week of my business, honey, paper doesn't remember wrong. People remember wrong. Paper just remembers. 9 years of marriage, friends, and I never once audited it because you don't audit what you trust. But I archived it. There is a difference, and the difference saved my life because an audit looks for trouble and an archive just waits for the day trouble looks for you. And before I hand you Marta, I owe you the honest tour of the marriage itself, the 9 years, because a moving truck is never the first sign, friends. It is the last one. The first signs come years early, dressed as jokes, and I reframed every single one, and I am going to show you 4 of them because somebody watching tonight is currently reframing their own set, and I would like to interrupt. Sign 1, the dinner parties. At every dinner party of our marriage, my business belonged to Brent. Not legally, friends, verbally. Someone would ask what I did, and before I had swallowed, my husband would be off. We started the staging thing back when the market turned. We saw the gap, we knew the builders, and I used to sit there warm as toast about it because I heard we and thought partnership. It took me years to notice the grammar only ran one direction. His sales numbers were his, my company was ours. His bonus was I earned it. My contract with the builders was we got lucky. Friends, listen to the pronouns at your own dinner table. People will tell you exactly what they think they own, and they will tell you in grammar, years before they tell you in trucks. Sign 2, the allowance joke. Money conversations in our house had a costume, and the costume was comedy. If I bought anything for myself, and I mean anything, a coat, a chair, once memorably, a standing mixer, Brent had a bit he did, hands up, mock terror. Well, there goes my allowance, guys. She controls the treasury, and everyone would laugh, and I would laugh, friends. I laughed at it for years. Here is what the bit actually was. It was a press release. It told every room we ever stood in that my competence was a punchline, and his spending was a hostage situation, and it worked so well that when everything came out, 2 separate couples we knew admitted their first thought was, well, she did control all the money. I controlled a spreadsheet, friends. He controlled the story. Guess which one the neighborhood audited? Sign 3, the refinance. 2 years before the truck, Brent came home with a plan. All energy, all charm. We should refinance the house. Rates, babe, rates. And while we're in there, we should restructure, put the house and the business under one umbrella, one family entity, cleaner for taxes. His golf buddy's accountant could set it up. And friends, I want to be honest about what happened in me because it was not wisdom. It was smell. The same thing my mother had with rooms, 4 seconds. Something is wrong with this arrangement. I could not have defended it in court. I just felt the furniture of the proposal sitting crooked, my grandmother's money and my 9 employees folded under an umbrella held by a golf buddy's accountant. And I said, let me think about it, and then I did the thing I have done my whole life when a thing smells wrong. I stalled with paperwork. I told him my business attorney would need to review the structure, and I copied her on an email and friends. The plan died right there, quietly, of daylight, the way crooked furniture dies when a second person walks into the room. He never raised it again. Gwen, years later, reading that email chain in Discovery, looked up at me and said, "Do you understand what this is?" And I said, "An old, dead tax idea." And Gwen said, "No, Tessa, this is the first draft of the robbery." He tried to get it signed over politely 2 years before he tried to carry it out the door. And your smell, your stall, your attorney email, that is the only reason this case is about a truck and not about an umbrella you could never have gotten out from under. Trust the crooked furniture feeling, friends. It is not paranoia. It is inventory arriving early. And sign 4, the smallest one, the one that still gets me. Every year, for 9 years, Brent forgot something. My birthday twice, our anniversary twice, the rest of the years it was smaller things, the dry cleaning, the dinner he swore he booked. And every year came the apology. Beautiful, warm, specific, better than the event itself. Friends, that is the design. And somewhere around year 7, Marta, setting down coffee on a morning after one of those masterpieces, said something I filed as housekeeper small talk and should have filed as prophecy. She said, not looking at me, wiping a counter that was already clean, "Mrs. Tessa, my husband, God rest him, in 31 years, he never once apologized nicely. He just stopped doing the thing." And she left the room. Friends, that was the whole sermon. 6 years I employed a woman who could read my marriage off the coffee tray, and it took a dollar store notebook and a moving truck before I learned to read it too. The signs are never hidden, friends. They are laminated. We laminate them ourselves with love so the weather can't get at them. And then one Tuesday at 2:14, the phone rings and the laminate comes off all at once, and underneath, in your own handwriting, is everything you already knew. Now, Marta, because you cannot understand the phone call without understanding the woman, and the woman took 6 years to understand. Marta came to us through an agency when the business got big enough that I stopped having Saturdays. 52 then, 58 now, a widow with one daughter, a nursing student back then, and hands that treat every object like it might be somebody's heirloom, because in her experience, friends, it usually is. She ironed pillowcases nobody asked her to iron. She saved rubber bands on the doorknob of the pantry. She called me Mrs. Tessa no matter how many times I told her Tessa was fine, and she ran our house the way a verger runs a church, quietly, completely, and with a private opinion about everyone who walked in that she would sooner die than voice. Or so I thought. Hold that. 2 things happened over 6 years that turned an employee into the woman who would one day whisper, "Don't come home." The first one I did, and I did not think it was anything. 4 years ago, her daughter, the nursing student, needed a certification course and an exam fee, $2,100 total, and the loan fell through, and I heard about it the way you hear about your housekeeper's life, in fragments over the sound of a vacuum, and I paid it, quietly, directly to the school, and I told Marta it was a bonus for 4 years of pillowcases, and I made her stop crying in my laundry room, and we never spoke of it again. Friends, I want to be honest, I did not do it to be a saint. I did it because it was a rounding error to me and a mountain to her, and any person who leaves a mountain standing to protect a rounding error deserves whatever their marriage teaches them. Her daughter is a labor and delivery nurse now, 2 towns over. Remember the daughter? She matters at the very end. The second thing, Brent did. And I only learned it from the notebook, so I will tell it here the way I learned it, cold. 18 months ago, my husband started asking Marta to adjust reality for him. Small at first. Friends, always small at first. Marta, if Tessa asks, I was home by 6, and then a wink, like they were sharing a joke about a surprise party. Marta, no need to mention the visitor, it was a work thing. Boring stuff. Marta, let's keep Tuesday between us. And here is what my husband never understood about the woman who cleaned his house, because he never once looked at her long enough to understand anything. Marta had been married, friends, 31 years, to a man who died holding her hand, and before he was that man, For 2 bad years in the middle, he had been a man with Tuesdays, and a young Marta had been lied to by doormen and neighbors, and one specific cousin who kept his secrets for him, and she had made a vow to God in a church in her 20s, and she repeated it to me later at my kitchen table with her chin up. I swore I would never be somebody's cousin. So when my husband started recruiting her wink by wink into the infrastructure of whatever he was building, Marta did not quit. And Marta did not tattle because, she told me later, who believes the housekeeper, Mrs. Tessa? They believe the husband, and then the husband fires the housekeeper, and the wife loses the one pair of eyes she has. Instead, my housekeeper went to the dollar store and bought a spiral notebook, and she started writing. 14 months, friends. Dates, times, arrivals, departures, a white sedan with a parking sticker from Brent's office in my driveway, 11 times, always on my travel days, always gone by 5. A woman's description, careful, respectful, the way Marta describes everyone, tall, brown hair, laughs loud, wears her sunglasses inside. License plate, recorded. The Tuesday my husband met a realtor at the house while I was in Phoenix, and the realtor's business card, which he threw in the kitchen trash, and which Marta took out of the trash and taped into the notebook, because, and I will quote her exactly, garbage is where men file the truth. Friends, I need you to sit with that sentence. Garbage is where men file the truth. Somebody put it on a plaque. And understand what she was doing, because it is not what a gossip does. A gossip tells. Marta recorded and told no one, not even her daughter, for over a year, a 58-year-old woman carrying a stone that size alone, every day, dusting the study of a man she was documenting, serving coffee to a wife she could not warn yet, waiting, praying, she told me, every Sunday, Lord, let me be wrong, and if I am not wrong, tell me when. The Lord's timing, it turned out, was 2:14 on a Tuesday, because that morning, cleaning the study, she had found the folder my husband left out, confident as ever, certain as ever that the help does not read. And in the folder, friends, was the thing that changed her vow from watch to speak. Not the affair. Marta could have carried the affair to her grave. She had practice. It was a purchase agreement, signed by Brent, earnest money already delivered, for a condominium across the state, dated 3 weeks earlier, in the names of Brent and first initial only, K, and under it, printouts. Our joint accounts with balances circled and handwritten arithmetic in my husband's handwriting, dividing, subtracting, and one post-it note on top in a woman's handwriting that was not mine, with a heart on it and 4 words. After she flies out. After she flies out, friends. I was the she. The conference was the window. The truck was booked for the exact hour my flight was supposed to leave the ground, and my husband was going to spend my 3 days in Denver emptying our home of everything portable and every dollar liquid, and be gone across the state with a woman whose initial was K before I landed back into a stripped house and a drained life. And the last thing Marta wrote in the notebook that morning, before she picked up the phone, in her careful Sunday letters, was this: he is not leaving her. He is robbing her first. I cannot keep the vow and the silence both. The silence loses. The corner of Linden is 4 houses down from mine, a cluster of mailboxes under a maple, and that is where I stood at 2:31 on a Tuesday, while my housekeeper walked toward me carrying a canvas grocery bag like it was a newborn. I will remember every detail of those 10 minutes until they close the lid on me. The mail truck idling somewhere, a sprinkler arguing with itself 2 lawns over, and Marta setting the bag on the mailbox shelf, taking out the folder and the notebook and laying them side by side and saying, the folder is his, the notebook is mine. Read his first, so you know what is happening. Then read mine, so you know how long. I read the purchase agreement in the shade of a maple tree. Friends, 40 feet from my own driveway, close enough to hear the packing tape. The condo, the initial K, the circled balances, the arithmetic, the post-it heart, after she flies out. And I want to tell you what happened inside me, because it was not what the movies promise. No screaming rose up, no tears, not yet. Those came later, at night, on schedule, for months. What happened was that the noise of my entire life went quiet, all at once, like a breaker thrown, and out of the quiet came a voice I knew very well, the voice I use on job sites when the sofa is wrong and the open house is in 1 hour. And the voice said inventory. Then it said timeline. Then it said, do not walk into that house until you know what you are walking in to do. So I stood at a mailbox and read 14 months of my housekeeper's Sunday handwriting friends, and here is the thing I need you to understand about reading it. Page 1 hurt the worst. Not because it was the worst, but because of the date. 14 months. 14 months of white sedans and Tuesdays while I flew to conferences and told my hotel mirror I was lucky, and staged 40 houses and hosted his mother at Thanksgiving, and I stood there doing the math every betrayed person does, the backwards calendar, that weekend, that birthday, that night, he said. And Marta stood beside me in silence. And then she did the single kindest thing anyone did through this whole catastrophe. She turned to the last page, past the plates and the timestamps, and pointed at her own final entry, the one from that morning. He is not leaving her. He is robbing her first. And she said quietly, read that one again, Mrs. Tessa, because you are going to want to cry about the woman and you can. Later, I will make the tea. But the truck is today. The wire is soon. Cry about the woman later. Deal with the thief now. Friends, 58 years old, a grocery bag, and better crisis instincts than half the attorneys I have since met. Deal with the thief now. The woman is grief, the thief is arithmetic, and arithmetic has deadlines. So here is what I did in the driveway, and I want you to notice what I did not do, because every choice in the next hour got graded later, in depositions, and I did not know that yet, but I acted like I knew it, because the quiet voice knew it. I did not scream at him. I did not mention the folder, the notebook, the condo, or the initial K. I walked up my own driveway past the truck, and my husband came down the porch steps too fast, already talking, friends, already performing, hey, I thought your flight. Okay, don't freak out. I was going to call you tonight. This is just, I've been feeling like we need space. I rented a little place. I was going to take some things, and we'd talk when you got back. Calm, like adults. Space. A signed purchase agreement, a drained account schedule, and a Post-it with a heart on it. And the word he brought to the driveway was space. And I stood there, friends, and I felt the apology machine warming up. 9 years of watching it work. And for the first time in 9 years, I watched it the way Marta had watched it. From outside, and from outside, friends, it is not charm. It is inventory management. I said, okay, that is what I said. Okay, take what's yours, leave what's mine. We'll talk when I'm back from Denver. And my husband, this man who had planned my robbery around my boarding time, looked at me with 9 years of confidence and one flicker. One of something at the back of the eyes because okay was not in his script, and men like Brent rehearse your lines too, friends, and I had just gone off book. Then I did the strangest thing I have ever done. I went inside, past the boxes, and I made 2 cups of coffee while strangers carried out my sofa. And I gave one to Marta in front of him, and I said, Marta, stay till they're done. Make a list of everything that leaves. You know this house better than anyone. And Brent laughed the charm laugh and said, babe, we don't need an inventory. And I looked at my husband across a driveway full of our marriage and cardboard, and I gave him the only line I had rehearsed. I said, sweetheart, I stage houses for a living. There is not a room in America I can't put back the way it was. And I got in my car and drove, friends, not to Denver. 4 blocks to the parking lot of a grocery store, where I sat with both hands on the wheel and shook for 6 minutes by the dashboard clock, because the quiet voice pays for itself in delayed tremors. That is the exchange rate, composure now, shaking later. Every strong woman you have ever admired knows the currency. And then I opened my phone and I did not call my mother, and I did not call my best friend, and I did not post one word anywhere. Friends, hear me, nothing silence, because a documented man must never know what you know until the paper is ready. I called Gwen, but before the war room, I had to survive Tuesday night, and I am going to give it to you unedited, because the internet is full of the courtroom version of stories like mine, and nobody ever shows you the first night. And the first night is where the women watching actually live. The truck pulled out at 5:40. Brent left 20 minutes later in the good car with the gym bag he thought was subtle, saying he would give me space. At a hotel, which we both silently understood was not a hotel, and I stood in my foyer and listened to the garage door close, and then I did what my profession has trained me to do in any room, friends. I read it. And a half-emptied house, hear me, a half-emptied house is the most honest document a man ever files. He took the television, both of them, and left every book we owned, including the ones he gave me. He took the wine fridge and left the crock pot, took the espresso machine and left the kettle, took the leather recliner and left the reading chair, and item by item, room by room, the inventory assembled itself into a portrait, friends, and the portrait said, "This man packed for an audience. Everything that impresses, gone. Everything that comforts, left, because comfort does not photograph." And Kay, whoever Kay was clearly getting the showroom version of Brent, the version I got in year one. And standing in my gutted living room, I felt the strangest thing. Not grief yet. Recognition. He had staged himself, friends. 9 years of watching me dress empty rooms to look loved in, and the student's final project was his own exit. And then I got to the dining room, and the portrait broke my heart the other direction, because there, untouched, was my grandmother's china cabinet with every piece of her china behind the glass. He left it, friends, not out of mercy, out of appraisal. He took a $900 wine fridge and left the only priceless thing in the house because its price tag reads wrong to men like him, and I stood in front of my grandmother's cabinet in a stripped room and I put my hand flat on the glass, and I want to tell you the first fully formed thought of my new life, the very first one. It was, he never knew what anything in here was worth, and I meant the china, friends. And then, one breath later, I did not mean the china anymore. That is when Marta came back. 7 o'clock, she had gone home at 5 like any Tuesday, and at 7 my doorbell rang, and there she stood, out of uniform, in her church cardigan, holding a pot with 2 hands, and behind her, at the curb, her nephew's car idling, having driven her back across town. She said, "You should not eat what is in that kitchen tonight. Everything in that kitchen is from before. I made albondigas. It reheats. And, Mrs. Tessa, I will stay 1 hour and we will make the lists, because tonight you are going to want to either cry or clean, and both are better with soup." Friends, 58 years old, fired from nothing yet, owed nothing, risking the only job she had by being there at all. And she came back at 7 with soup and an agenda. We sat at my kitchen island, the island he left because granite doesn't load, and we made the lists, hers and mine, what left on the truck, room by room, from her memory, which is photographic about that house, and what the folder said, and what the notebook said. And somewhere in that hour, between the soup and the lists, I stopped shaking for good. Not because the fear ended, friends. Because the fear got a format. That is the secret nobody tells you about catastrophe. You cannot feel your way out of a demolition, but you can list your way out, one line at a time, and a woman who irons pillowcases nobody asked her to iron had known that for 30 years, and brought the format to my door with the soup, because in Marta's church, friends, casseroles are for grief, lists are for war. At 9, she washed the pot herself over my objection out of pure muscle memory, and at the door she stopped and I could see her weighing something, and then she said the thing that carried me through the entire 11 days. She said, "Mrs. Tessa, tomorrow you will meet the lawyer, and it will begin, and it will be long, and I want to tell you the one thing I know that the lawyer does not. I have cleaned this house for 6 years. I have cleaned houses for 30. And I am telling you as a professional, the mess he made is the kind that comes out. Not fast, but it comes out. I have seen so much worse than this come out." And she patted my hand once and got in her nephew's car, and I stood in my doorway watching the taillights holding a soup pot, friends, and it hit me, standing there, that in one single day I had lost the marriage and been shown the marriage both in the same afternoon by the same woman. "Don't go home," she had said. She was right, friends. That address, the one the truck backed away from, that place had stopped being home sometime in the last 14 months without telling me. What she meant, what the whole story turned out to mean, was, don't go back to the set. The show is over. Come to the mailboxes and start living in the true thing. And the true thing that first night was albondigas and a legal pad. And friends, it was already better than the showroom. It reheats. Gwen Okafor was a client before she was my attorney. Friends, I staged her lake house 2 years ago, and we became the kind of friends who trade referrals and truths, and I knew exactly 2 things about her professional life. She did family law, and opposing attorneys said her name the way you say a diagnosis. She answered on the second ring, and I said, "Gwen, it's Tessa. I need to hire you today. My husband is emptying our house right now, and I have reason to believe he is about to move a very large amount of money." And there was a pause of exactly 1 second, and then Gwen's voice changed gears without changing volume, and she said 3 sentences I want every woman listening to memorize. Do not confront him about money. Do not leave the marital home for any trip. Cancel Denver tonight. And bring me every piece of paper you have ever touched. Tomorrow, 8 a.m. And Tessa, when I say every piece, I am praying you are the kind of woman I think you are. Friends, she was praying I was an archive. And I sat in that grocery store parking lot, shaking, 6 minutes divorced from watching my sofa leave, and I said the sentence that made my attorney laugh out loud on a Tuesday afternoon. I said, "Gwen, I have 9 years of scanned receipts sorted by room." The next morning, her conference table disappeared under my marriage. The inheritance trail, my grandmother's estate check, the deposit, the wire to the builder, the kitchen invoices, the addition, $180,000 of separate money flowing into that house, every dollar photographed the day it existed, memo lines filled in, friends, memo lines. Gwen kept touching the printouts like they were relics. The business records, 9 years, clean as an operating room. The folder from the study, photographed page by page at the mailbox before Marta put it back exactly where she found it. Because my housekeeper, God bless her criminal genius, said, "He cannot know the folder traveled. A man who feels watched moves faster." And the notebook. Gwen read the notebook in complete silence for 11 minutes. Friends, and when she finished, she closed it, sat back, looked at me, and said, "In 18 years of this work, I have seen private investigators bill $40,000 for worse surveillance than this. Who is this woman?" And I said, "She irons my pillowcases." And Gwen said, "Not anymore. Nobody who wrote this ever irons anything for anybody again. We are going to want her deposed, protected, and possibly bronzed." Then the war started, and I promised you the 11 days, so here they are, compressed like they felt. Gwen filed Wednesday morning. Divorce, yes, but the filing that mattered was the emergency motion, what her office calls a freeze order, temporary restraining order on marital assets, no transfers, no closings, no wires outside ordinary living expenses, and to get a judge to sign one fast, you need evidence of imminent dissipation, which is legal for he is about to spend it, hide it, or drive it across a state line. And here is where the folder earned its keep, friends. A signed purchase agreement with earnest money delivered is not a suspicion. It is a countdown in writing, and the closing date printed on my husband's condo contract was 11 days out, and any first-year attorney knows that a man does not close on a love nest with cash he intends to split fairly. Discovery moved like lightning because Gwen subpoenaed with the notebook as her map. Friends, she knew which bank, which branch, which week, and what came back was the architecture of an 8-month robbery. A new LLC registered in the spring, Brentline Consulting, Friends, the man named it after himself, thieves and toddlers, nothing survives contact with their own vanity. Regular transfers, small ones, camouflage-sized, out of our joint accounts into Brentline going back 34 weeks, and one pending instruction, dated the day before the truck, one wire, scheduled for that coming Friday, $210,000 out of the joint brokerage through Brentline to a title company across the state. The condo closing, friends. He was going to buy her house with our money before I got back from a conference he chose the dates around. Now, the race. The freeze order needed a judge's signature, and judges have calendars, and Friday's motion docket collapsed under 2 emergency custody matters. Real emergencies, children, the kind that should go first, and did. So, at 3:40 on Friday afternoon, my $210,000 was 4 business hours from gone. And Gwen took her jacket off a chair and said the most lawyer sentence I have ever heard. She said, "Dockets are where motions wait. Chambers are where judges sign. Walk fast." We caught Judge Marino in the hallway of the 3rd floor at 4:31. Friends, a man on his way to his granddaughter's recital with his coat half on, and Gwen made her case in 90 seconds flat, standing, folder open across her forearm like a hymnal, the purchase agreement, the wire instruction, the closing date, and Judge Marino looked at the paperwork, then at me, and asked exactly one question. He said, "The housekeeper wrote all this down for 14 months. Why?" And friends, I did not know I had the answer until it was already out of my mouth. I said, "Your Honor, she says she swore to God she would never be somebody's cousin." And that man looked at me for a second and something crossed his face. Some case of his own, some Tuesday of his own. Everyone has one, friends, everyone. And he uncapped his pen against his coat sleeve and signed the order on the hallway windowsill at 4:38 and said, "Tell her the court appreciates thorough citizens," and went to the recital. The clerk stamped it at 4:55. The wire died in the pipe Monday morning, friends. $210,000 frozen 11 inches from the state line, and across town a title company called a condo seller to say the closing had encountered a complication, and somewhere in an apartment I have never seen, a woman whose initial is K learned something true about the man she had chosen. He talks, you believe him, and then the paper arrives. And now I get to tell you about Thursday of that first week, friends, the best petty afternoon of my entire life. And I use the word petty with my whole chest because pettiness, aimed correctly, is just morale with a paint color. Wednesday, Gwen had filed, and the freeze motion had begun its long grind toward the following Friday. And I was rattling around a house with furniture-shaped holes in it, sleeping badly, doing grief math at 3 in the morning, and Thursday at 8, my project manager Dominic called about a staging install that had been postponed and asked what he should do with crew and trucks that were suddenly free for 2 days. And I stood in my gutted living room, friends, with my phone in my hand, looking at the dent in the carpet where the leather recliner used to sit. And the quiet voice, the job site voice, said, "Well, we do have an empty house on the schedule." By 10:30, there were 2 of my trucks in my driveway, right where his had been 48 hours earlier, and my whole crew, friends, all 9 of them, because the other install was light and nobody wanted to miss this one. Word travels through a warehouse faster than through a family. And for one entire day, my company staged my house. Not with rental beige, friends, hear me. I walked my own warehouse at dawn with a clipboard like it was somebody else's project, and I pulled the pieces I had been quietly buying and loving and renting out for years. The down sofa that every client begs to purchase, the reading lamps, the big, honest farm table from an estate sale in year 2, and my crew carried it all in, and Dominic stood in the living room with his level, moving the sofa an inch at a time saying, "Boss, say when," and Marta, who had shown up unasked, obviously directed traffic with a dust cloth in her hand like a conductor's baton. By 6 that evening, friends, the house was not restored. It was corrected. 9 years of compromised furniture, his black leather, his glass and chrome, the giant television wall that had arranged our whole living room around the watching of other people's lives, gone, and in its place, for the first time in my adult life, a house that agreed with me. Books where the television reigned, the reading chair promoted to the window, my grandmother's china cabinet, which had spent 9 years in the dining room's darkest corner because Brent said it read, "Grandma," moved by 4 gentle men in moving blankets to the center wall of the living room. Friends, the first thing you now see from the front door, lit like the archive it is. And at the end of it, my crew stood around eating the pizza I bought in the golden hour light, admiring their work the way crews do, and Dominic raised his slice and said, "Best install of the year, boss, 5 stars, would divorce again," and everybody froze for a second, friends, the way a room freezes when a joke lands on the line, and then I laughed. First real laugh in 72 hours, the kind that bends you over, and the whole crew exhaled and laughed with me. And if you have ever wondered whether your people are your people, catastrophe will introduce you. And here is why Thursday mattered beyond morale, friends, because there was one more visitor to the set. Saturday morning, Brent came back. For more of his things, he texted first, court manners arriving early, and he walked into that living room mid-errand and stopped. Friends, dead, keys in his hand, And I watched my husband of 9 years look around a home that had erased him in one business day, and I watched him understand in real time, standing on carpet with no dent left in it, what I had told him in the driveway. There is not a room in America I can't put back the way it was. He thought I meant the furniture, friends. Saturday morning, watching his face inventory his own absence, watching him find the china cabinet promoted and glowing where his television used to hang, he understood what the sentence had actually been. Not a threat about sofas, a disclosure about me. He took his boxes and left without one word of charm, friends, the machine offering nothing, no lilies, no we, and Marta, who was polishing a counter that did not need it, purely to bear witness, waited for his car to clear the drive and then said to the window in the tone she uses for stains that finally lost, "There, now the house is clean. Before Monday's bounced wire, I owe you the middle of those first days, friends, the unglamorous middle, because the freeze order gets the highlight reel, and the middle is where I actually became the woman who could stand in that hallway at 4:31. Two things happened in the middle. The first was a date, and it is the one that finally made me cry about the man instead of the money. Gwen's paralegal built a timeline as discovery came in, every Brentline transfer on one long exhibit, 34 weeks of them, and I was reviewing it at her conference table with coffee going cold when my eye snagged on the first entry, the very first transfer, the seed of the whole robbery, and the date. Friends. The date was 6 days after our 9th anniversary. Our 9th anniversary, which we spent at the coast, at the little hotel from our honeymoon, his idea, friends, his booking, and it had been, I would have testified to this under oath at the time, a genuinely beautiful weekend, the old Brent, the year one Brent, attentive and funny and warm, and I flew home from that weekend and told my best friend the marriage was in the best shape it had been in years. 6 days later, he opened the LLC, and I sat at Gwen's table doing the terrible math, and there was only one shape it made, friends. The coast was not a rekindling. The coast was a site visit. He was walking the property one last time before demolition, taking a final measure of what he was leaving, or worse, and I think it was worse, buying himself a clean memory to carry out the door, one good weekend to hold up later against the word thief. I put my head down on my attorney's conference table, friends, on top of Exhibit 19, and I cried for the first time since the mailboxes. And Gwen, who has watched 100 women find their own version of that date, moved the coffee, put one hand between my shoulders, and said nothing at all for 4 entire minutes, which for Gwen is a eulogy. Then she said, "Okay, now you know the worst true thing. Everything after this gets easier because nothing else he did loved you first. Write that down too, friends. The worst true thing is a doorway. You do not get around it. You go through it once with your head on a conference table if necessary, and on the far side of it, the man loses his last hostage, which was the good memory. And after that, friends, paperwork is just paperwork. The second thing in the middle was a widow named Mrs. Ellison, and I need you to meet her because the universe has a sense of humor about timing. My work did not pause for the war, thank God. The warehouse and the cruise and the install calendar rolled on, and that second week included a job I had almost handed off, a downsize, a 79-year-old widow leaving the 4-bedroom colonial where she had raised everybody, moving to a 2-room apartment near her daughter, and we do those, friends, the sad ones, staging the old house to sell and setting up the little new place so it lands soft. And I almost passed it to Dominic because I did not think I had the heart that week. I took it because Marta looked at the schedule and said, "No, Mrs. Tessa, take the widow." Trust me, cleaning women know things. So I spent an afternoon in a little apartment arranging 50 years of a woman's life into 400 square feet, hanging her photographs at the right height, making the reading lamp land where the chair actually faces, and Mrs. Ellison followed me room to room, supervising with her cane, and at the end she sat down in the chair, in the light, looked around at the tiny place and said, "Well, it's not the house, but everything in here is true. Everything in here is true, friends." 79 years old, 400 square feet, and she had just handed me the design brief for the rest of my life. I drove home from that install past my own house, my big house with the furniture-shaped holes in it and the frozen war around it, and for the first time I understood the assignment was identical. Smaller life, true inventory, light where the chair actually faces. And when we finished the paperwork, Mrs. Ellison held my hand a beat long the way old women do when they have read you, because they always read you, friends, and she said, "I don't know what is happening in your life, dear. A person doesn't hang pictures that carefully unless something is crooked at home. But I will tell you what I told my daughter. The house is never the thing. The house is just where the thing lives. Go make sure your thing is worth housing." Marta was right, friends. Take the widow. Cleaning women know things, and so do widows. And between the two of them and one terrible anniversary date on Exhibit 19, I walked into Friday's hallway already knowing what I was actually fighting for. Not the address, the true inventory. And that, friends, you can win. That no truck can carry. You are wondering when Brent found out I knew everything, and the answer is Monday, 9:20 in the morning, when his wire bounced and his phone rang. And it was not me, friends, it was Gwen's paralegal serving notice. And I want to walk you through my husband's counterattack in stages, because the stages are the same in every one of these stories, and if I name them for you now, one of you watching will recognize them in your own kitchen this year, and naming them is armor. Stage 1 was the apology machine at maximum output. He came to the house Tuesday, 1 week to the day after the truck with flowers, friends, flowers, and the speech was a masterpiece. I panicked, the move was stupid. Kay was a mistake that was already over. The condo was an investment he had been afraid to tell me about because I am, and I quote, intimidating about money. And the wire, babe, the wire was for us, and we could still fix this. 9 years, Tessa, 9 years. And friends, here's the part I am not proud of and will not hide. For about 4 seconds, it worked. 4 seconds, standing in my own doorway, 9 years of muscle memory reaching for the feeling of being apologized to, that warm, winning feeling, and then, friends. Then I heard Marta's voice in my head from the mailboxes, calm as a hymn. He will talk, and you will believe him, because you always believe him. And the 4 seconds ended, and I looked at the flowers, and I said, "Brent, the grocery store was out of your usual lilies. This is a gas station bouquet. You didn't even stage the apology, and I closed the door." Friends, gently, the way Marta closes doors, click, and through the wood I heard the machine sputter for the first time in its operational history. Stage 2 was rage, which arrived by text at 11 that night, a different man entirely. The mask fully down, you will hear from my lawyer. "You think you're so smart. You were nothing when I met you." And friends, I did not reply to one word of it. I just did what I do. I archived it. Screenshots, timestamps, cloud folder labeled because paper doesn't remember wrong, and neither do screenshots. And 6 months later, Gwen read that entire thread aloud in a deposition in her flattest voice while my husband studied the table. Stage 3? He fired Marta. Of course he did, friends. He could not fire me. He could not fire Gwen. So on Wednesday morning, he called the one person in the catastrophe who punches a clock, and he told her that her services were no longer required and that she should be careful about spreading lies about her employers because references matter at her age. References matter at her age. 58 years old, 14 months of the only honest record of his life, and he threatened her references. She called me from the bus stop, friends not crying. Marta does not cry at men like Brent, but quiet. And she said, "Mrs. Tessa, I am not sorry for one word in that notebook, but I am 2 months from my lease renewal, and I need you to tell me plainly if I have made my daughter's mother unemployable." And I want you to hear what I told her, friends, because I have never in my life been more certain of a sentence. I said, "Marta, you are not unemployable. You are unavailable. As of 9 o'clock this morning, you are the operations manager of my staging company, full salary, benefits, and your first assignment is to stop taking calls from unemployed men." The line was quiet a moment. Then my housekeeper, my witness, my mailbox prophet, said the only joke I ever heard her make about the whole affair. She said, "Well, I will need to see 9 years of your receipts first, Mrs. Tessa. I hear you keep them. If this story has earned it from you, friends, this is the moment. Tap that like button for Marta, because the algorithm should know her name, and stay with me, because the deposition is next, and the deposition is where every stage of the counterattack came to die. I should pause the stages here and answer the two questions you have been holding since the mailboxes, because Discovery answered both of them for me in the same week, and they belong together. Who was Kay, and where was his mother in all of this? Kay was Kayla. And yes, friends, the sunglasses woman from the notebook, tall, brown hair, laughs loud, wears her sunglasses inside, and she was not a stranger who wandered into our marriage. She was the client relations manager at Brent's own office, 4 desks and 1 promotion away from him, and she had been at my table. Friends, hear that part. Twice. The same North Side builders whose model homes have my furniture in them, men who had watched me work installed days in the rain for a decade, men whose wives had my cell number, and nobody staged an intervention, nothing so dramatic. There was simply, over about 8 months, a quiet migration of renewals away from the office where the whole affair had been conducted on company time. And Brent's top salesman plaque did not survive the second year. I did not lift one finger for that, friends. I want it on the record. I never made one call. In a town this size, the truth does its own marketing. Now, Lorraine, and for Lorraine, we have to go backwards, because a woman does not coach a robbery from your patio furniture out of nowhere. There is always a history, and ours was 9 Thanksgivings long. From the outside, my mother-in-law and I got along beautifully. Friends. That was the design. Lorraine operates exclusively in subtext, a woman who has never once said a hostile sentence and never once meant a kind one. And every Thanksgiving at my table, eating food I cooked in a kitchen my inheritance built, she ran the same 3 plays. Play 1, the compliment with a trapdoor. "This tablecloth is charming," she would say, touching it with one finger. "Is it from the staging warehouse?" Meaning, is even your hospitality rented? Play 2, the concern. "Brent looks tired," she would tell me privately at the sink, both of us elbow deep. "He works so hard, and men need to feel like providers, Tessa. I hope he feels like one in this house." And friends, that sentence, repeated in seasonal variations for 9 years, was the family thesis. My success was not our asset. It was his injury, and Lorraine tended that injury like a garden, watering it every holiday, whispering to her boy that the house he lived in kept score against him, until the day he decided the score needed settling by truck. And play 3, the inheritance audit. Twice, friends, twice over the years, Lorraine steered dinner conversation to the unfairness of how young people structure assets these days. Separate accounts, prenups, all this mine and yours. In my day, a family was one pot, and both times, Brent brought up something within the month. The umbrella, the refinance, the one family entity. I did not see the choreography then. The notebook and the discovery file laid it flat on the table later. Mother suggests, son proposes, wife stalls, repeat. And Gwen, reading my old emails against Lorraine's dinner dates, said something I want every underestimated wife to hear. She said, "Tessa, in 18 years, I have learned one thing about men who do this. Almost none of them are architects. They are contractors. Somebody else always drew the plans, and when you find the affidavit lying about you, friends, 9 times out of 10, you have found the architect signing her work. So when that notarized lie arrived, the roommate story, the tacit knowledge story, I was hurt, friends, but I was not surprised, and there is real power in not surprised. Surprised argues, not surprised archives, and you already know what the archive had waiting for her. Page 41, the patio, the carafe, the weather in the margin. You'd better move the money before you move the boxes. The architect, friends, caught at the drafting table by a woman refilling the coffee she had ordered like furniture. Stage 4 was the legal theory, and it was ugly, and I promised you real, so here is real. Brent's attorney built the whole defense on one idea, that I knew, that the accounts, the LLC, the condo, all of it was, in their filings, actual language, financial planning undertaken with the tacit knowledge of both parties. and that I was a sophisticated businesswoman rewriting history, weaponizing a bitter housekeeper, and staging, his lawyer actually used my own word, friends, staging a victimhood I had planned for months. And the centerpiece of this theory, the mother of it, was an affidavit from Lorraine, my mother-in-law, friends. 9 Thanksgivings at my table, and the woman signed a sworn statement saying I had told her at a family dinner in the spring that Brent and I had agreed to separate finances and were already living as roommates, which would have made the transfers ordinary and the freeze order an ambush. A lie, friends notarized. And for about a week, it scared us because affidavits from silver-haired mothers read well, and Gwen sat me down and said, "We can beat the documents into the ground, but a jury of 1 judge still hears family, and family testimony is weather. We need an umbrella." The umbrella, friends, was in the notebook the whole time, page 41. Because 14 months earlier, on a Tuesday, Lorraine had come to the house while I was in Phoenix and had coffee with her son and the woman whose initial is K on my patio for 2 hours, and Marta, refilling the carafe, had heard my mother-in-law laugh and say, "And it is in the notebook in Sunday handwriting with the date and the weather. Well, she's lovely, honey, but you'd better move the money before you move the boxes. You'd better move the money before you move the boxes." 14 months before the truck, friends. The affidavit said Lorraine learned of our separation from me in the spring. The notebook proved she was coaching the robbery from my patio furniture a year before that. And when Gwen served notice that the housekeeper would testify to page 41 with the carafe in her hands and the weather in the margin, my mother-in-law's attorney, a separate attorney by then, friends, note that detail, withdrew the affidavit citing a recollection error. A recollection error. 14 months to the day, with the weather in the margin. Paper doesn't remember wrong, friends. Patios neither. The deposition happened in October, in a conference room with a long table and coffee that tasted like a copier, and I promised you this room at the beginning, so come sit next to me. Brent's attorney was a big, confident man named Whitfield, who wore his watch loose so it clattered when he gestured, and he spent the first hour on the theory, the sophisticated businesswoman, the tacit knowledge, the bitter housekeeper, and he built to his moment the way men like him do, leaning back, letting the watch clatter, and he said it. He said, "Look, counselor, this is a touching story. The loyal maid, the secret notebook, the wicked husband, but strip the theater away and it's her word, his word, and a diary from a disgruntled ex-employee your client conveniently hired the week we fired her. Can you actually prove any of it?" Friends. Gwen did not answer him with words at first. She reached under the table and she lifted a banker's box onto the table, and she took her time with the lid because my attorney bills like a surgeon and stages like me, and then she began setting items on the table in evidence sleeves one at a time, narrating flat like a flight attendant pointing out exits. Exhibit 12, purchase agreement, your client's signature, dated while my client believed her marriage intact. Exhibit 14, wire instruction, $210,000, scheduled around my client's conference itinerary, which is Exhibit 15, forwarded to your client by my client in April, establishing he knew her travel dates before he booked the truck, the mover's invoice being Exhibit 16, dated the same afternoon. Exhibit 19, 34 weeks of transfers to an entity called Brentline Consulting, and counselor, I want the record to reflect the entity is named Brentline. Exhibit 23, the post-it note, original, recovered from the folder, handwriting exemplar pending, it says, after she flies out, and it has a heart on it. And exhibits 26 through 40, friends, 14 months of a notebook, authenticated, with dates, plates, and weather, corroborated at 11 separate points by bank records, gate logs from our neighborhood, and the deposition of a title company officer. And then my attorney stacked her hands on the box lid and looked across the table and said, "You asked if I can prove any of it. Counselor, I am struggling to find a part of it I cannot prove. Would you like a moment?" 11 minutes, friends. That is how long it took Whitfield to ask for a recess. I timed it off the wall clock out of pure poetry, the same 11 minutes as my drive home. And when they came back from the hallway, the tacit knowledge theory had died out there between the water fountain and the elevator, and the conversation turned for the first time to the word settlement. But I skipped a deposition, friends, and it is the one you actually want, because 2 weeks before Gwen opened her banker's box, they deposed Marta. Whitfield had been telegraphing it for months. The bitter housekeeper theory needed a bitter housekeeper, and his whole plan, Gwen warned us, would be to crack the notebook by cracking the woman, and Gwen offered to spend a full day preparing her, and Marta listened politely to that offer and then asked exactly one question. She said, "Am I allowed to just tell the truth slowly?" And Gwen said, "Mrs. Reyes, that is the entire job." And my housekeeper said, "Then I have been preparing for 58 years." I was not allowed in the room, friends. So what follows came to me from Gwen, who took 11 pages of notes she later admitted were mostly for her own enjoyment. Whitfield began friendly, the watch clattering, establishing her employment, her wages, her hours, and then he leaned in and started the program. "Mrs. Reyes, you were terminated by Mr. Brent, isn't that right? And within a week you were hired by his wife at a significant raise." A reasonable person might see a woman with a financial motive to tell a certain story. How much is your testimony worth, would you say? Friends, Gwen says the pause that followed was long enough that the court reporter looked up, and then Marta said, "Sir, I want to answer you carefully because you have counted the money in front of me, so let me count the money behind me. 4 years ago, Mrs. Tessa paid $2,100 for my daughter's nursing certification, and she did not know then that I would ever see anything, or write anything, or matter to anyone, and she never once mentioned it again, and my daughter delivers babies today because of it. So if you are asking whether I was bought, sir, you have the date wrong by 4 years and the direction wrong entirely. Nobody bribes backwards." Gwen says Whitfield looked at his legal pad for a moment. Friends, the way men look at a map that has stopped agreeing with the road. He tried twice more. He suggested the notebook was written recently, all at once, to order, and Marta reminded him gently that page 9 had a coffee ring on it dated 14 months ago, and that the lab his own side hired had already aged the inks, and that she had been told the results came back, and here Gwen swears she used this word, satisfactory. He suggested she had violated the family's trust by recording its private life, and friends, this is the answer that ended the deposition as a contest, so I will give it to you whole, the way Gwen performs it at dinner, standing up, doing the voice. Marta folded her hands, and she said, "Sir, for 6 years I was trusted with their keys, their laundry, their medicine cabinets, and their garbage, and I never once opened a drawer that was not my work to open. The things in my notebook walked past me while I cleaned. A man who does his sins in front of the help is not betrayed by her memory, sir. He has simply mistaken a witness for a mop." And Gwen says the court reporter, a professional of 30 years, made a sound, friends, a small one, strangled, immediately disciplined, but a sound. And Whitfield called for lunch early, and after lunch he asked 19 more minutes of gentle housekeeping questions and released her. And outside, in the parking lot, Marta asked Gwen if she had done all right, because, she said, she had never spoken to a lawyer before except at her husband's funeral. Never spoken to a lawyer before, friends? Gwen told me she stood in that parking lot and said, "Mrs. Reyes, I have prepared witnesses for 18 years. Today I learned 2 new answers, and I will be using both for the rest of my career, with your permission." And Marta said, "Of course," and then, worried, asked if the coffee ring had hurt the case, because she had raised that notebook to be tidy. The coffee ring, friends, the single most authenticating object in the entire file, 14 months of dated honesty soaked into dollar store paper, and the woman apologized for it. That is who called me at 2:14 on a Tuesday. That is who they tried to spend a morning breaking. The mop, as it turned out, had been a witness the entire time, and the witness, as Whitfield learned by lunch, had been raised tidy. And friends, tidy does not crack. Tidy just tells the truth slowly, with its hands folded, until the man with the loose watch runs out of map. I will give you the terms the way Gwen gave them to me, short and clean. The house, mine, free and clear, my grandmother's 180,000 traced to the penny, my name alone on the new deed. The business, mine entirely, untouched, his claim to any share surrendered. The frozen 210,000 split by the court's math after the dissipation was counted against him, which is a polite way of saying, friends, that every camouflage transfer to Brentline for 34 weeks got added back into the pot and then subtracted from his side, and watching a man's secret spending become a line item deducted from his future is the closest thing to time travel the law currently offers. And attorney's fees. His contribution to mine, ordered because judges read notebooks too, friends, and Judge Marino, the recital grandfather, had the case to the end, and at the final hearing he said one sentence over his glasses that I have framed in my head. He said, "Mr. Brent, the court has rarely seen a marriage this well documented, and never by accident. And you may reflect on the fact that the documentation was only ever dangerous to the person behaving badly in front of it." As for the rest of the cast, quickly, because dignity endings do not linger on the fallen. K. The condo across the state closed eventually. Friends without him in it. She walked when the money froze, which told everyone everything about the architecture of that romance, and I have no anger left for her. Truly, she believed him too. We were colleagues in that she just believed him on my furniture. Lorraine. My mother-in-law of 9 Thanksgivings sent me a Christmas card the first year as if the affidavit had never existed, wishing me peace in this difficult season, and I did not send one back, friends, but I did not burn it either. I archived it. Some people get forgiveness, some people get a folder, and Lorraine earned the folder, and the folder is patient, and so am I. Brent. He lives across town, sells insurance somewhere smaller, and 18 months after the settlement, he sent me a long email. The apology machine's final firmware update, therapy words, growth words, closure words, and I read it twice because I am honest, and some of it, friends, some of it read almost true. And then I noticed the last paragraph asked whether, given how well the business was doing, I would consider releasing the fee judgment early. The machine cannot help itself, friends. Even its repentance has a memo line. I replied with one sentence, the shortest archive entry of the whole war. I wrote, "Paper doesn't remember wrong, Brent, and neither do I, and I wished him well, and I meant it the way you mean it from a distance, the way you wish weather well, generally, and from indoors. I want to give you the year after the settlement, honestly, too, friends. The part the satisfying stories usually skip, because the gavel is not a finish line, it is a starting gun, and the race it starts is quiet and personal, and nobody claps at the end of it. The grief came on schedule like I told you it would, not for him exactly. Grief is not that literal, friends. I grieved the man I had believed in, who, it turns out, I had partially built myself. The way I build model homes, out of good lighting and strategic angles and the visitor's own hopes. And there were nights that first winter, alone in a house full of furniture that finally agreed with me, when I sat in the promoted reading chair and cried for a resident who had never actually lived there. Tuesdays were the worst for a while, which is its own dark comedy. I saw a therapist every other Thursday, a calm woman with a sand garden on her side table, and I will give you the single most useful thing she said, free of charge, because it reframed my entire 9 years. I told her I felt stupid, friends, that was the loop. 14 months of sedans in my driveway. How does a woman who reads rooms for a living not read her own? And she said, Tessa, you read rooms you walk into. Nobody can read a room they are standing in the middle of. That is not blindness. That is geometry. And the only fix for geometry is a person standing somewhere else who is willing to tell you what they see, and you had one, and when she finally spoke, you believed her in 11 minutes. Some people get told for years and never drive home. Write that down, whoever needs it. Friends, nobody can read a room from the middle of it. The fix is not becoming unfoolable. The fix is keeping people who stand at other angles and believing them fast. The first Christmas, I flew nowhere and hosted nothing and let Marta talk me into her daughter's table. And I brought my grandmother's china, friends, all of it, packed in the moving blankets my own crew uses, because china in a cabinet is an archive, but china on a crowded table is a life. And a 2-year-old future baby cousin banged a spoon on a saucer that survived 4 generations and 1 robbery, and everyone gasped, and the saucer held, and I thought, there it is. That is the whole estate doing its job. And the business, friends, the business grew because catastrophe is terrible for marriages and excellent for focus. And somewhere in that second year, I started doing a thing with my closing clients that I want to leave here for any woman building anything. Every newlywed couple whose first house we stage now gets a gift from my company at closing. It is a fireproof document box, friends, a good one, with folders already labeled in Marta's handwriting, deeds, accounts, inheritances, receipts, and a card that says, "From one homemaker to another, paper doesn't remember wrong." The husbands always laugh politely and think it is quaint. The wives, friends. The wives look at that box, and then some of them look at me a beat too long, and I hold the look, and something passes between us at one out of every, I would estimate, 4 closings. And that transmission, that 1 in 4, is the most important service my company offers, and it is free, and it is not quaint. It is infrastructure. And Gwen, since you will ask, Gwen and I have a standing dinner every quarter, war anniversary optional, and at the first one she slid a wrapped gift across the table, and it was a framed photograph, friends, of a banker's box, our banker's box, exhibit stickers and all, taken on her office copier like a mugshot, and under it a small brass plate she had engraved. It says, "Would you like a moment?" It hangs in my warehouse office, next to a photograph of a dollar store notebook, and between them, in a smaller frame, a grocery receipt from that first Tuesday, 2:47 p.m., one parking lot, nothing purchased, because I keep, friends, as established, everything. The receipts of the worst day. The proof I sat in that lot and shook and then dialed anyway. Some archives are for court, some are just to remind you who drove, and now the parts you actually stayed for. Marta runs my operations to this day, friends, 3 years on, and she is the finest hire of my career. A woman who ran one house like a church now runs 9 crews and a warehouse like a diocese, and the rubber bands still live on doorknobs, and God help the vendor who invoices us wrong because she reads everything twice and files the truth where garbage cannot reach it. Her lease worry is over, permanently. The company bought a little duplex as an investment the second year, and the operations manager lives in half of it at a rent I would describe as symbolic. And she has planted the whole front strip with tomatoes and pays me in sauce every August. And the sauce, friends, if I am being honest, is worth more than the rent. Her daughter, the nurse her certification built, had a baby girl last spring. They named her Teresa. They call her Tessie. I got the phone call in my warehouse, friends, surrounded by rented sofas, and I sat down on somebody's future living room and cried the whole ugly good kind because you can freeze wires and win depositions, and it is grief with paperwork, all of it, and then one Tuesday somebody names a baby half after you, and that is when you finally understand the score. And me. I still live in the house, and it took me a year to want to. The first months, it was evidence, then it was empty, and then slowly, room by room, I did the only thing I know how to do. I staged it, except for once the client was me and the brief was the truth. And friends, the house I built out of that brief does not look like a magazine. It looks like a woman lives there. Books stay open, the cat owns the salad bowl outright now. And every second Sunday, the kitchen fills up. Marta, her daughter, the baby, Gwen when the war business allows, and we cook too much and nobody performs anything for anybody. And last Sunday, standing at my stove, Marta looked around at all of it, the noise, the sauce, the baby in the salad bowl era of her own life, and she said quietly, so only I could hear, "You know, Mrs. Tessa, I was wrong once." I said, "Write it down, Marta, first time for everything." And she said that day on the phone, "I told you, don't go home, but this." And she nodded at the kitchen, at the noise, at all of it. "This is what you drove toward the whole time. I just didn't know it was still 11 minutes away." Friends, I have thought about it every day since. And here is the whole story in one line, the line I will leave you with tonight. A house is what they can load onto a truck. A home is who calls to warn you. Count your Martas, friends. Pay their daughters' exam fees when life lets you, not for the return. There is never supposed to be a return. And then one Tuesday, when everything you built is being carried down the driveway in boxes, listen for the phone. Somebody who irons what nobody asked her to iron is about to tell you the truth. Believe her first. believe her fast, and keep your receipts.